Hey guys, what's up? It's Looney TNT. Today is best rating class in World of Warcraft. That is our video today. So I had a few people asking me what the best rating class is. I wanted to cover some basic stuff for players to understand a couple different concepts and how to know what the best class is. Now, timing is everything. It's everything in life, right? Even with World of Warcraft. When you're looking at raid tiers, there's different classes that are going to perform a lot better than others. Now, that doesn't mean if you know your class, you're going to find a home in a raid guild. If you know what you're doing, you're going to be okay. If you're just trying to find that OP spec that is just doing amazing DPS right now and you keep jumping around spec to spec, you're never going to develop the class as good as you would if you stuck to one class. So let's try to find a class for you, and let's go over a couple different situations. Now, best rating class, that could be DPS, tank, healer. That can mean a lot of different things, right? Let's cover all those. Let's cover tank first. Now, when you're looking at tank, obviously there's going to be different scenarios and different cooldowns. You always have that this tank sucks at the moment, and this tank is just, it's so easy to heal because all of his cooldowns and everything like that. So, at the point of this video, you might be watching it during Warlords of Draenor, you might be watching it during Legion, you might be watching it during even another expansion. There's always going to be different scenarios, right? You look at the Brewmaster Monk. I don't see very many Brewmaster Monks, but there are some out there. I see a lot of Paladins. I see a lot of Warriors, right? You occasionally see the Druid. You see the Death Knight. But you don't see many Brewmaster Monks. And even if your guild, your main tank or your off tank is a Brewmaster Monk, chances are maybe a Paladin, maybe a Death Knight, they might have some spells to help out the encounter a lot more than a Brewmaster. So when you're looking at the best tank, you're going to have to check out which cooldowns, which encounters are doing the best. It's kind of hit and miss on tanks. Now let's go ahead and go to DPS. That's what a lot of people, they want to be top DPS. Let's talk about different classes and different specs, because let's say we are a warrior, right? We have arms and we have fury. Depending on the encounter, might depend on the spec that you choose. Our warrior DPS, different fights, he will be going from fury to arms. So what he has to do right now is he has to maintain two different sets of gear, maintain two different weapons to make sure that his stats are optimal for different fights. Now that doesn't mean the warrior is better than a hunter, right? I play a hunter. Hunters are very, very strong, and they are typically strong. When you're looking at best rating classes, hunters are usually always up there. And they are a very easy class to pick up. They're a very easy class to play. And they also are a full DPS class. What that means is, when you're looking at everything, when you look at the, let's say the Paladin, right? Let's go to the Paladin real quick. When you look at the Paladin is, you can either be a Ret, you can be a, Ret is the DPS class, you can be Protection, which is the tanking class, and Holy, which is the healing class. Now, if you're set on DPSing as a Ret Paladin, there's chances that you're not going to be very good at certain points. And there are chances that you might do very well, right? I remember during Wrath of the Lich King, Ret Paladins were amazing because everything was undead, so they did so much damage. But you look at certain patches and certain raid tiers, there's times where Rets are just not going to do very good. When you have, when you go to a hunter, for example, if Beast Mastery is not doing very well, if for some reason they nerfed Beast Master Survival, well, you're still going to have Marksman. There's still going to be that top DPS spec for you, rather than just, oh, it's a Ret Paladin. We don't want a Ret Paladin. Same thing with rogues and mages, warlocks, and so on. You're that core DPS. So when you're looking at core DPS, you're going to be wanting to look for classes that have, the triple spec DPS. If you want to be that viable, rating class and you don't want to have to switch. Now, that's not saying that your class can't be very well, such as Boomkin, right? Or Feral. Boomkin Druids are always very, very decent, and right now they're absolutely amazing. They're going through some overhauls for Legion, so who knows what they're going to be like. But you do have that melee DPS Feral to draw back on, and then you also have a tanking and healing spec. So when you're looking at optimal everything for a rating class, Druids are insane because they can do everything. You can do everything you want. Do you want to be that player, though, that has to switch between tank, healer, melee DPS, range DPS? You don't want to be that guy. You don't want to be that guy forced into having to get all this gear for every spec, learning how to play it. If someone doesn't show up, you're the one that's swapping. I don't like to do that. That's why I like my Hunter, my Warlock. I know when I'm playing that night, that's what I'm going to play. I'm not going to start switching specs and things for that stuff. Now, that said, let's go into the Death Knight. Now, the Death Knight is similar to a Ret, but it's a little bit different because the Death Knight has 2 DPS specs, and they have 1 tanking spec. Now, the Death Knight is usually very, very strong. They're a very easy class to play. There's a couple buttons you're hitting. If you want to optimize your spec, obviously, there's some other things you're going to do. But for a newer player that's starting out, the rotation's very easy to get into. In current state right now in Hellfire Citadel, melee fights are super easy. You're not doing too much. Maybe there's some fights where you need to grip some stuff in and things like that. But overall, the Death Knight is always very strong. Now, depending on gear, I've raided with Unholy Death Knights and I've raided with Frost Death Knights. Typically, Frost is one of those specs that are just, people call them face roll, but, they're just, I play a Hunter, so that's a face roll class too. It's not much. You maybe have 3 buttons, you're trying to maintain cooldowns, and you're good to go. So, Death Knight is a good choice too, and especially if you're a newer player, you can start at level 55 and level it up fairly well, right? Now, let's say you buy the game, though, you're going to have that free level 100 boost anyway. So, which class do we pick, right? Let's talk about the monk a little bit. Now, the monk is a very interesting class because it does have that tank healer DPS. The DPS spec for the monk is not doing very well at the moment. They are doing some overhaul with the class. They are going to be working some things out. But typically, you don't see a DPS monk topping the charts very often. In maybe certain scenarios, maybe. But you don't see it very often. Healing as a monk is very good right now. One of our top healers in our guild, and one of the top healers I've ever seen, is actually a monk. And he does phenomenal numbers. It's one of those classes, it's still kind of new. So it's still in that weird area where not a lot of people know how to play it because it's kind of interesting how you play the spec. But when you know how to play the spec, it's amazing. Now, if you're a healing monk, you can switch off to DPS and you can switch off to tank. So that's another bonus too. But as we talked about before, do you want to be that class, right? Let's go and talk about the Warlock. Here we go, the Warlock. I love the Warlock. I've played a Warlock for a very, very long time. And it's one of those classes that I have so much fun with. There's different styles to play the Warlock, right? You have Affliction with your dotting up. You have Demonology, which is going to be getting an overhaul in Legion, but they're the demons, right? You're summoning all these pets. You have Destruction, where you're just trying to hit as hard as you can with your Chaos Bolts, and you're actually a really good cleave because you can put out a lot of AoE damage. Just a fun class, right? So if you're looking for the best rating class and you're looking for someone that's always reliable, always doing very decent numbers, Warlocks always do decent numbers. They do have to switch around a lot, though. They do have to switch around from Affliction to Destruction to Demonology, depending on, raid scaling and things like that, because that's a big deal, too. Some specs get stronger as the gear gets better, right? You're looking at classes that have a lot of crit. The higher your crit chance, the more damage you're doing, such as, let's say, Demon Hunter. It looks like Demon Hunters are actually going to be stacking crit because of their ability, and when they crit on ability, they don't use any, I forget what their energy source is called, but they don't use that energy source, so it's just a straight crit, and you can do it again. So they're going to be stacking a lot of crit. So you're going to see them being very strong at the end of the expansion. And also because they're a new class, they're going to be OP for the very first of it anyway. But then they're just going to keep scaling with that crit. So it's going to be really good. But, you know, you're looking at if you're looking at playing a Warlock is always a good choice. Always a good choice. Let's talk about the Mage. The Mage is an interesting subject, because the Mage is usually, not always, but usually top DPS in-game, just doing ridiculous numbers, right? Arcane, this whole expansion, has been killing it. If you are a fully geared Arcane Mage, there should be no reason you shouldn't be topping DPS on majority of the fights. Now, there are occasions, right, where certain fights do better with certain classes, and certain classes have different scenarios that they do really well with. But anybody that's ever played with a really good geared Arcane Mage understands that they just blow stuff up. Their openers are incredible. You look at Fell Reaver getting killed in mythic modes in less than a minute, and the whole group when they're doing speed kills are Arcane Mages. They burst incredibly. You know, I saw a video with Arcane Mage that got very lucky with his RNG. He was pulling like 400 to 600,000 DPS on Archimon Mythic mode. That's insane. That is just some crazy numbers. So the Mage is going to be a good class whether you're doing PvP. We're not really talking about that, but if you're doing PvP or PvE, Frost, Fire, Arcane, just a great class. So a Mage is something that you can't go wrong with if you pick. Let's talk about a Shaman. Shamans. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're very bad. I was an Elemental Shaman in Wrath of the Lich King, and I absolutely loved it. Ellie was just such a fun class. I remember the first time I ever leveled a Shaman, my goal was to be a healer because I wanted Chain Heal. They got Chain Heal at level 40 back in the day, and I wanted level 40 for Chain Heal. That's what I wanted. I was like, alright, if I can just get Chain Heal, nobody dies, because I'll just AoE everybody. It was, you know, I was a newer WoW player, and it was just fun. But when you're looking at the Shaman, they do have a healing class, and they have a melee and a range. Ellie is amazing when it comes to AoE damage fights. You know, Chain Lightning is just something that's very good. Enhancement is a good spec also, but unless you have when you have your 4 set, you do so much more DPS. And I'm going to try not to get into that, because sometimes, you know, these videos will be viewed, you know, a year later in the new expansion and things. But typically at this time right now, I'll tell you guys what I mean. Enhancement does really decent DPS, but when you get your 4 set in Hellfire Citadel, and you guys can look back up and see what their 4 set was, they do a lot more damage than they previously were. So that you can take that into account too, and different things. But if you're looking to just roll one class, you're going to want to pick something that you're not having to swap with. So Shaman overall, Shaman healing is typically good. You know, it's never just garbage, and it's never the best. It's always sometimes in the middle. And sometimes you will get to that point where they are garbage and they are the best, but they always average out as a middle ground healer. They're good, you know. So let's talk about the Priest. The Priest is very interesting. The Priest, the only class to have 2 healing specs and 1 DPS spec. So if you're looking to DPS, well, guess what? You only have one choice. So this is going to be a ranged Shadow Priest. you're going to do okay numbers. Shadow Priest is more built, Blizzard has even said it, they're more built for an AoE than they are single target. So single target, you're not going to see giant numbers out of a Shadow Priest, but you can do phenomenal things if you learn your class and know how to play it, and especially if there's multiple mobs. Shadow Priest is just a Shadow Priest. They're okay. They're never phenomenal. They're always okay. You can find those players, though, that are just amazing at their class, and they make them look good, though. So remember that. You could be that person. Now, they have 2 healing specs. They have, they're Discipline and they have Holy. Disc is what everybody calls them. They do all the bubbles. What they are is they bubble everybody to prevent incoming damage. They are one of those classes where if you are raiding, you want a Discipline Priest. You want a Disc Priest because it's going to help you out a lot, and it's going to help the other healers out. You never want to stack them, right? You don't want 2 Disc Priests in your raiding scenario because, cooldowns of their bubble and things like that. But you always going to want a Disc at the moment, right? Things could change. They could change stuff. But if you want to always be needed, a Disc Priest is good. But you can't stack them. So remember that. Now you have Holy, right? Holy is the other DPS, or the other healing spec. Right now, it's one of the worst specs out there. It's not very good. But you look at Mop. There was people one healing SOO in-game with a Holy Priest. So it's always that hit and miss. All right, the Rogue. Very interesting. The Rogue is going to be getting a huge overhaul in Legion. Now, the Rogue has always been that class that is very strong. Whenever you're raiding with a Rogue, the Rogue is always going to pull numbers. He's always going to do very well. PvP is the place to be when you're playing with a Rogue. Sometimes they're not doing very good, but the stuns and everything that they can do, there's a lot of stuff they can do with everything. The Rogue is a very mobile class. Now they're going to go head to head though in the next expansion with Demon Hunters. And that's just my opinion. Demon Hunters look like they're going to give Rogues a run for their money, just because they have a lot of mobility, just like a Rogue does, and they have similar fighting styles. So it's going to be very interesting. But if you do want to be a Rogue, you do have 3 triple DPS specs, so you can find a way to make that work. So we talked about Paladin a little bit. We talked about Warrior a little bit. We talked about Hunter a little bit. What is my pick for the best raiding class in the World of Warcraft? The best. As a hunter, I know this is going to sound cliche, right? But as a hunter, I've always found groups. The problem with being a hunter is there's always multiple hunters in my group. Sometimes when you're doing a pug, you'll find, 4 to 5 hunters. And the reason for that is because they're doing very well right now. But if I had to pick something, I'd pick my Warlock. I love the Warlock class. I love everything they do. I love the ability to summon. I love my Hellstones. I love everything they can do. They always find something for a Warlock to do in a raid to make them viable. They could battle res. They have so many different options. When you're looking at the Warlock class, you cannot go wrong with picking a Warlock. So hopefully this helped you guys out. It's kind of a gray area where you can't just say this class is the best because it does this much damage, or they absorb this much damage, or they heal this much damage. It's not the case. It's a pick and choose from different tiers, from different fights. Get good at one class though. I made the mistake of rolling a lot of alts and getting okay at all of them, but not great at one of them. Get great at one of them, and then you can start doing alt runs and getting better at your other classes. But get great at one. Stick with one the whole way. Get it to level 100, gear it up, raid with it, understand the class, look at forums, look at guides, do everything that you can. But you can't go wrong with picking any class in World of Warcraft, because eventually you're going to be that class that is just OP, and if you know how to play that class, it doesn't matter if someone's like, oh, Boomkins are OP, I'm going to start playing it. It doesn't matter. You've been playing it for years, and you're going to be the best at it. So, hopefully that helped you guys out. A longer video, but I just wanted to cover many different things. This is typically for more newer players. This isn't for the old school player that's been playing a long time that knows this information. But sometimes you need something to listen to while you're grinding out that gold, grinding at those mounts. So I appreciate the support. I appreciate that you guys are subscribed to the channel. If you guys haven't, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, share the video, do whatever you guys got to do. And I'll talk to you guys soon.